on 99.5, 107.5 The Butts, Bigfoot Country Legends, and simulcast on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Now, here's Thomas Frank Carr and Landon Tengwall.
This is a really interesting game. Welcome to the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We are live from the Field Burger and Tap in State College. Come say hi throughout the next 90 minutes as we talk about this game. Landon, my job here, I feel like, to start this show is to characterize what this game is about, the meaning, the impact, set the scene. And I'm having a really hard time because I feel like this is a good team. This is a good road test, but the opinion, like the general opinion about this game, feels all over the place. So help center me. Bring us together. What do you think about this game today? What's your opinion of what today means?
Yeah, first off, Penn State controls their own playoff destiny. And so today you are able to essentially you take care of business today away at Minnesota. You're coming home, Maryland. They're pretty much on par with Purdue, so I'm not very worried about Maryland. But you look at the game today against Minnesota, they are a classic Midwestern, middle-of-the-pack Big Ten school. They are hard-nosed. They're going to hit you. They're going to run the football. And they have some decent players, but they are not as talented as a Penn State, Ohio State, or even Indiana, especially right now beating Ohio State.
So that's the other part is like today, right now, specifically during the show, all eyes in the football world are glued on Ohio State, Indiana. We'll give you some updates throughout the show because it's on here at the Field Burger and Tap right over the bar. Right now, not a great look for Penn State because Indiana drove down on their first drive and scored a touchdown. So Penn State opened up with a good drive against Ohio State. They just didn't score in that game, but everyone's going to be doing the post-facto adjudication of how Penn State played in that game based on how Indiana plays. So this is just a very tense day for Penn State football fans on multiple levels. What do you think so far of what you've seen in that game?
Oh, man, Indiana looked like they walked down the field on Ohio State, and Ohio State went 3 and out. So should be – I mean, Ohio State normally starts slow, and they have the explosiveness in their offense to be able to make that up. Yeah. So we'll see what happens there with Indiana. But getting back to Minnesota for a second, I do think there's a little bit of a misconception about this team that they're not that good.
Right.
They were on a 4-game win streak, and they lose to Rutgers last week. And I think that kind of deflated Minnesota's momentum a little bit. But if they would have won last week, and obviously, like I said, they didn't, but they would be 7-3.
7-3.
They'd be on a 5-game win streak, and there's a lot different vibe of that team. And then we watched the tape. Rutgers got a little lucky, it felt like, and it didn't feel like they really dominated Minnesota there. So, I mean, Minnesota, they're a good team, and I think they're just looked at differently after they took that loss to Rutgers, who Rutgers was also somebody that was thought to be
early season favorite.
Exactly.
Could Rutgers run the table is something people genuinely asked in September.
Well, people thought Rutgers was going to be what Indiana is now, essentially, at the beginning of the season. So, it's been interesting to watch. But nonetheless, a good team that you should beat if you're Penn State, but if you play around and you come out slow, they can throw some haymakers, and they might land a couple. So,
yeah. It's interesting also because that, like you mentioned, that game against Rutgers, the perception bias of losing to a team like Rutgers, even if they're better this year than they have been in years past, is very strong. And it was kind of a fluky performance from Rutgers, who doesn't throw the ball well and somehow threw for 240 yards and I think 2 or 3 touchdowns in that game. So 2 of the things that Minnesota is good at are defense and pass defense specifically didn't work in their favor. I'm interested because, like you said, we watched the film. This is a good defense, and this team is built on that defense. If they didn't have a very good defense, they wouldn't be a good team. So some of this opinion about the team Penn State's going to play today is fair in that they are very one-sided, but at the same time, that side is able to give Penn State a test. Conversely, Drew Aller's the best quarterback they've faced this year. So I guess to me, like, to spoil the ending of the show here, if Penn State wins and wins convincingly, this is a step in the right direction game for me, where you can't just dismiss this as of course they beat Minnesota when you look at the end of the year. Do you think that other people are going to agree with that? Like, I guess when you're talking about the College Football Playoff Committee and they seem to value Penn State's schedule a little more, do you think that the perception of Minnesota's strengths is there as well for people who are, going to give credit or take away credit from Penn State in this final couple weeks where you've got this titanic battle going on in the Big Ten right now?
I mean, I think if you fast forward a little bit and where we sit and you waxed Washington you handled Purdue, and then you go out there today, you dominate Minnesota, and then you finish off after a little Thanksgiving meal. You finish off Maryland, who, like I said, is not a very talented team this year. And I think the college football playoff committee, everybody's thinking pretty favorable about you. And I think that's why the consensus is that Penn State finishes these last 2 games strong. They are pretty much guaranteed a home playoff game. And I think James Franklin knows that. And the players know that. James Franklin was actually asked about it, and he said, look, the players, that's all they hear about is the possibility of a home playoff game. So, I mean, we're talking about it a little bit, but it'd be fun because that's all anybody could think about. I mean, making history, the first ever playoff game home at Beaver Stadium, and then who knows, maybe welcoming a SEC team, something like that. If playoffs started today, Georgia would be coming to town in December.
No bowl games in the North that the Southern teams generally go to.
Nope.
I do think it's a very interesting, because I like to operate in fact, as opposed to narrative. And the facts should inform your narratives. But you write the story of Penn State coming off the loss to Ohio State. We've already been writing it of usually coming off a loss in the past, and this is the established understanding of Penn State, true or not, coming off a loss, letting that one turn into 2. They smacked around the last 2 teams. If they do that for the final month of the season, you could say they were strong in the beginning, they lost to a good team close, and then they finished better than they started. So that momentum and all the things you were talking about that Minnesota lost with that loss to Rutgers, the same can be true for Penn State if they lose to Minnesota today. But on the flip side, if they come out and play strong, do you think, now we're getting into hypotheticals to start the show, but if it's a grinding win where they win by maybe 10 points and it's 24-14 or something like that, on the flip side, is the perception a negative one that Penn State, I don't know if they're getting any better?
I mean, short term, yeah. But once you handle Maryland and then get through that, I think you're fine. Like I said, really no matter how they win these last 2 games, as long as it's not anything too bad, like an overtime win, I don't see any way we are not hosting a home playoff game. But at the same time, like I said, going out to Minnesota, it's the first real cold game that the Penn State players have played this year. And it's like you said, it's a good defense, and they tackle well. They're physical. And anytime you're playing a good, well-coached, physical team in November in the Big Ten, you better buckle up and make sure you're not coming to sleep. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing with Penn State. Can we continue to start fast?
Do you think that the physicality that they've shown on both sides of the line of scrimmage shows up again today? And given what you just talked about of making sure that you come out and you don't let up, or that you don't let the environmental factors sap maybe some of the momentum from a mental standpoint that you've talked about on both sides of the line of scrimmage, but I'm specifically thinking about that offensive line.
I think after what happened at Ohio State, there was a little bit of a talk amongst the offensive linemen of, hey, we cannot be physically dominated ever again. We're not going to let that happen. And then we saw them turn around. Washington was a really good showing for the offensive line, getting back on track. And then once again with Purdue. So I think it's a little bit better of an interior defensive line. And I think this is probably the second best defensive line we've seen all year up to this point, especially from a run standpoint. We were really impressed with number 97, Jalen Logan Redding. He's that defensive tackle, good down there. So hopefully we can reestablish the run against a better defense, because we've struggled at times, and we've talked about this early in the year. We were incredibly even in the run and pass, and it made defenses have to guess, and that's what allowed Andy Kotelnicki to be so successful
and explosive in both elements.
Exactly,
the explosiveness of that run game that has kind of rescinded, kind of taken a step back throughout the year, is what forces those teams to put an extra safety in the box, right?
Absolutely, and it gets to a point too where it's like, if you can constantly dominate up front, those play action passes, everything opens up deep, and it just continues to really just let you get deeper and deeper into that playbook if you're Andy Kotelnicki. So I think making sure you establish the run first today is the biggest thing for this Penn State offense.
Yeah. So trying to set up the scenarios, the stakes of this game, not trying to ask a bunch of speculative what-if questions, but just say what's on the line for how this team could play today, what might happen. So last final big picture thoughts about this game. Is there anything else that you think is important from a check the box, check this off the list to see Penn State accomplish that in the regular season against a good team before you get to a Maryland team that you feel like, as we've discussed, bottom of the Big Ten, team that they should dominate pretty thoroughly from beginning to end. What's left for you on the analysis? Check this box if you're Penn State to-do list.
If you're these Penn State wide receivers, you really have struggled to get it going so far this year. And even talking last week against Purdue, going into halftime, Penn State wide receivers only had 2 catches for 10 yards. We have to be able to rely on another wide receiver when a better team can take away Tyler Warren. I think the only team on our regular season schedule that has the ability from a coaching and a player just being athletic standpoint to take away Tyler Warren seems to have really only been Ohio State.
Yeah.
So I don't think Minnesota all the way or Maryland can take away Tyler Warren, but I want to see the ability to be able to feed a wide receiver when we do face a defense in the playoffs like Georgia, like Alabama, like Ohio State again, that has the ability to take away Tyler Warren. So I need to see a little bit more from these wide receivers today against a good opponent.
We're going to get into those matchups here throughout the bulk of the middle of the show. We're going to start, because we basically talked about it here for the first 10 minutes. We're going to start with the Penn State offense and get into some of those matchups, get into some of the details about what we've seen on film from Minnesota and how we think that is going to play out this afternoon. Then we'll get to the defense. So Landon coming up with his key matchups, and then we'll get into all of that. We'll be back on the Penn State Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5, 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Right now, though, Penn State practice updates.
I'm Thomas Frank Carr from Blue White Illustrated, and each week I get to see about 10 minutes of practice with the rest of the media. Here are my impressions from that work on Wednesday. Want to get the best of our practice reports, and you want to get them earlier maybe? Join Blue White Illustrated right now to get an awesome deal. Sign up for just $1 for a week of access. From there, you'll be automatically enrolled in our yearly 50% off promotion. It's our 2 most popular deals rolled into one. While a quick scan of the current weather forecast for Minneapolis today doesn't show precipitation this weekend, the Nittany Lions were working with wet footballs on Wednesday just in case. During the team's standard ball security drills, coaches dunked the balls in buckets of water and then spun them to the skill position players throughout the drill. However, there is some weather on the forecast for next weekend against Maryland, and the season is projected to extend into late December. So, no better time than the present to work on some winter weather drills. This week, the focus of the Penn State receivers was on their work after the catch. While the team has scaled back running through skeleton drills that we see, they did add a new layer of emphasis for Wednesday's practice. Assistant receivers coach Mark Dupuis played free safety and attacked the receivers after their catch, and they had to make a move to evade him. Minnesota plays an aggressive zone defense, so securing the football after the catch and breaking a tackle is critical. From a participation standpoint, Julian Fleming was not with the receivers on Monday. Amari Evans took his place as the 3rd receiver through passing drills behind Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford. Over on the offensive line, things went back to normal after left tackle Jabin Williams moved to guard for the team's blowout win over Purdue. Now, long-term, Williams is likely a guard, and freshman Egan Boyer has impressed during his first year on campus. But in the short term, Boyer is still 6'8", 260. That's not exactly ready-to-play weight. Williams needs to be ready in case something happens to starter Drew Shelton, so he was back at tackle during practice on Wednesday. Just like practice on Wednesday, that's it. Really? That's it? Well, yes and no, but the rest of it's at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can check it out while you wait for the Tailgate Show to return in a moment. Practice on Illustrated.com. Please come join us over by joining the site. Like Brad, he says, do you think Penn State should be making more of a concerted effort to target wide receivers in the passing game? Seems like you want to try to build on some confidence rather than if a team takes away Tyler Warren. We talked about this at the beginning of the show. Do you think that that's something they should be doing here in the final 2 weeks?
Sure, marginally, I guess. I don't think anybody is changing at this point. I think at the beginning of the season, you could make that argument. And I think that they thought that was what was happening. And then the level of competition got better and the momentum just dissipated. And so that's not what I'll let you fix it, T. Frank. I can't fix it. I can identify and say, hey, it is somewhat you would imagine that they will need receivers to catch footballs and run them up the field against good opponents.
Yep.
when they get to the playoff. I think that's a reasonable assumption to make, that you cannot simply go to Tyler, right? Tyler Warren touched the ball 11 times on 36 snaps on Saturday.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Like, that's unreal how focused that they're trying. And I do think that there is an element where people are ignoring the fact they did get the ball to Omari, right? They did get the ball to Denmark. They made a concerted effort to put the ball in their hands, whether it was a pass route or an end around.
Yeah.
But, the results,
I'm
not sure, speak to it.
This is the second half of the conversation we've been having about trying to get the receivers involved and develop that room a little bit. And one of the pivots has been end arounds, jet sweeps with the receivers, trying to get fast guy Omari Evans the football behind the line of scrimmage and let him run with it. Obviously Tyson Denmark was that guy in this previous game, but I guess, how do you see that pivot going so far?
Not great. I mean, what's the advantage of, so Omari got the targeting call. So very positive play on Penn State's behalf there against Washington. And then, of course, got him out into the flat and did not work as well as they had hoped. What is the difference there than getting Nick those touches? Like that is kind of like the fallback that I go to. And it's not necessarily, so you've got two primary targets in the passing game. You I don't know if you want to tell bring your stat up now that we talked about in the.
You can go for it. Yeah.
No, I don't have it on me, so you're going to have to do that.
Okay.
But you've got two primary targets. I'll give you a second here. In Tyler Warren and Trey Wallace, and then all of a sudden it's a drop off. And we looked at some things with Oregon, with I think it was Ohio State that you pulled one other program, and they typically have three.
Get the expert's view of today's game. Here's Landon Tengwall as he gives you the key matchups. Brought to you by Stalker Chevrolet. For your next vehicle purchase, come to Stalker Chevrolet and save with low interest rates. And remember, only at Stalker Chevrolet will you get the Stalker Advantage with the purchase of any new vehicle.
Welcome back into the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. We are talking my key matchup of the game, and I am looking at Penn State's interior offensive line versus Minnesota's interior defensive line.
Wait, what? The interior of the offensive line?
We're talking interior offensive line.
Former Penn State offensive guard Landon Tengwall wants to talk about the interior. I'm just messing with you,
I think
man.
for my key
Just
matchup of the
you.
week, we went interior offensive line like 3 games at least at this point. But no, it is. And I say it every week. The Penn State rushing offense is the backbone of the offense, and it's the reason they are able to do everything else. It's the reason they're able to stretch the ball down the field. It is the reason they get into those fun plays that Kotoniki runs. And how that starts is you get a push from those first 3 guys, Vanga Ioane, Nick Dawkins, and Sal Wormley, have to get after Minnesota up front. And we watch the tape. They got a couple guys Minnesota does on the defensive line that I think are really, really talented players and can give us a run for our money. So that, at the end of the day, and we've talked about this, that is just run game is just being more physical. Who wants it more? Who's been putting in a little bit more work in that weight room? And let's see what you got. So hopefully Nick Dawkins and the boys in the middle are ready to go.
I do want to talk about them for a little bit. We had this conversation at the Blue White Illustrated message board earlier this week. Somebody asked about Nick Dawkins and wanted a breakdown. And one of the things that I mentioned was his pass protection and the pass protection of the interior in general, not talking about your key matchup here, but kind of a side conversation, has been a big reason why Drew Aller has been so successful this year, in my opinion, is you saw so many free rushers up the middle last year, and this year he's had the ability to evade pressure because it hasn't, A, been a free runner between the A-gaps, and B, he's been able to step out of the pocket. They've given him that clean pocket up front. I guess, do you agree with that, and what's been your observation of why that changed this year?
Yeah, I mean, no, you're absolutely right. When those 2 guards in the center are not getting much push back on in pass pro, the tackles have a lot more leeway to kind of move the defensive end around because they're in a lot more space, and then Drew can evade. And Drew has gotten so much better this year at keeping his eyes downfield and just extending plays, moving around in the pocket. And I think, honestly, that's where we've seen him grow the most, if outside of leadership, which we've seen him bark at pretty much every defense on the field. It always looks like he's saying something when you get a glimpse at the on-the-field camera.
Yeah.
And I think Penn State fans love it. You want to see the fire out of Drew Aller. We were so used to that for so long with Sean Clifford, and I think the team was used to that. I was used to that as our main leader, a passionate, fiery quarterback. And I think Drew Aller is really starting to bring that.
Was Clifford a trash talker in the same way that Drew is? Like that I know that you're not out there, but like because here's the thing is like I'm just going to do some armchair psychology here because having met Drew a couple times and talked to him, he seems like a great person, like a really thoughtful, introspective, intelligent person. And if his competitiveness is psycho, that's probably a little uncomfortable. And he's got a little psycho in, which I love players that are just a little bit crazy. And so when he is himself, like his true self out there, and it's so far away from his normal personality, I am not surprised it took a little bit of time for him to be comfortable yelling at people and going like full, let me speak to your manager sort of like look in his eye, or like, I'm going to mess you up sort of look in his eye. That I love seeing, like you said, and I think it is part of that growth and development of it's okay to have it here, and it doesn't make you a bad person.
and I think he realized to be an elite quarterback at the highest level and win those big games, you have to have a certain level of moxie, of just like swagger behind you to be a star quarterback. And we all know just kind of what that looks like, and he is starting to emulate that. So it's fun watching him take that next step as a quarterback, but also as a leader. But let's get all the way back to the topic we were on, the offensive line. And
we're going farther. We're going farther afield in a minute, so make sure you hammer.
I know that was impressive how far away we got that quickly. But when you have that type of good protection, and I think Drew Shelton also deserves a shout out for the way he has played. We haven't really said his name at all in almost all season, and it's because he's been playing really solid at left tackle, filling in for Olu Fashanu, who went in the first round of the NFL draft. And we, not to say we haven't missed him, of course we've missed him, but we haven't really noticed too much of Olu missing so far this year, and that's a really good thing for Drew Shelton. So the problem is, and it hasn't been the pass rush all year. We've been protecting Drew Aller. If you think about Purdue, there was multiple times. I mean, he was back there sitting second, waiting, third read, nobody open, and then takes off. And then he had the run that looked like kind of Josh Allen-ish. Yeah. And he started to do more and more of that, but honestly, the reason he's starting to do more and more of that, I feel like, is because no one's getting open downfield. I'm not going to say no one or never, but it's also we still have yet to really throw a deep ball with the ones. The deep ball was the Trey Wallace, who was a busted coverage, and he was wide open. Yeah. But we still are not stretching the field.
Yeah, I'll push back a little bit on that, because this was a conversation, again, I had this week about that particular play. It's amazing the number of people that will complain about a 49-yard touchdown. In the progression of that play, he's got his first read, which a criticism of Drew Aller is that he comes off his first read too quickly. So he's giving Liam Clifford the opportunity to run up the seam. The defense takes it away. By the time he gets to Tyler Warren, the far boundary corner has run up and attacked the crossing route going to Tyler Warren. So Drew knows that. He extends the play and lets Trey Wallace work open deep. So, I think that there is even there context of that was him playing within the structure and understanding of the defense and taking what he knew was there. But I do agree. It looks and feels better in rhythm, and they have not been able to, in rhythm, attack a defense with a deep ball touchdown or anything like that.
Yeah, I know you're able. No, it was a fantastic play. I don't want to take anything away from the play itself, but yes, it's still, there was still a 3-week span where we just didn't want to stretch it. Yeah. And, it's time to chuck it up.
I've had a lot of these opinions and thoughts, Landon, are just like, I'm continuing a conversation I had earlier this week with somebody. Unfortunately, it's not even about you or this moment. It's just like, all right, hold on.
You got more practice than me with these, huh?
Yeah. Two things. I do want to talk more about the defense, but I'm looking over here at your shirt for the first time. Is this the I'm going to signal a play in and the dummy t-shirt with the green or the orange or the yellow? No. Every week we have a new fit from Landon Tengwall that's interesting and we have to talk about.
I'm always like, I'm going to throw something on cool today. No, it's kind of like we got the backwards flag. So it's like you're going in because the backwards flag means you're going into battle. Yeah. And then like this cool little patch on the side. Okay. So no, a little bit different than those. But I always think those guys are the coolest because they get to keep like a purple Penn State hat or like a red Penn State hat. Yeah. And it's like, who gets to actually, they don't make those. So it's kind of neat. I know it's interesting, but those are going kind of by the wayside with technology, and we're adding mics in the helmets.
Yeah.
And funny enough, you said you didn't watch the Thursday night Steelers Browns game.
Yeah.
Jameis Winston got hit so hard that his mic came out of his helmet. It was
What?
dangling. Yeah. It's pretty amazing. So maybe we'll see that in college football sometime soon.
That's crazy. Like I said, we're at the Field Burger and Tap. We're also live on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. If you can't make it, check us out there online, and of course 99.5 The Bus and Bigfoot Country Legends. But we have to take a moment each week and talk about the field, because the food is worth it. Here's one of those things that I'm remembering these things time and time again as we sit here each week. They bring out a shocking amount of fries. They have the table fries. You can order fries just for the table, and I'm not kidding. It is a bucket full. Like if you were going to go feed chickens, it's a chicken feed bucket full of fries for you for the table, or just for you if you're me or Landon. So there, I mean, I look down, I'm like, just $10 for basically 5 pounds of potato, like. Okay, and they've got a bunch of really awesome. You can add toppings. They got bacon, cheddar ranch. Oh my gosh, I got to stop reading this. I'm getting very distracted.
You're gonna get me hungry. Don't do that.
So check out the menu online. I believe you can check it out online, or you can just come in and just order stuff, because everything for the milkshakes, the beer, everything here is great. Getting back to the Penn State offense, one of the things, beginning of the week, we had the conversation of Minnesota. James Franklin detailed the differences between Penn State and Minnesota. Minnesota gets a lot of turnovers in this defense. Penn State does not have as many interceptions, and he explained the differences. Earlier this week, I went a little step further at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But from what you've seen of this defense and how they play, can you explain the differences and why they're getting their hands on so many footballs so far this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is you can bait teams into making that mistake, and you give them the underneath enough, and they will get tired of it, and then they'll want to take a shot, and you make them pay for it. So, and then also, I mean, Minnesota's pass rush has been decent, and whenever you're putting pressure on the quarterback, it can kind of lead into some interceptions and them throwing balls that they maybe shouldn't, because they're rushing the pass. So overall, we've seen Minnesota defensive backs. They rotate a lot, and they're all pretty good. They play well with each other. So I'm excited. I think this is the second best. I mean, Illinois actually had a really good defensive, as far as defensive passing unit and stopping the pass. But I think this is up there for Penn State as far as challenges for Drew Allar. I think overall it's the second best defense that Penn State has faced this year.
They've seen some good secondaries. Wisconsin had a pretty good secondary. And that we never got to see the second half of Drew Allar, but Bo Prabila was able to do some good work against them in the second half with that option game kind of benefiting the coverage schemes. This defense, to me, you mentioned Illinois. This is the best blend of front and coverage, because Illinois' defensive line surprisingly was not as stout as it has been in years past. The thing I loved watching, and I wrote about this yesterday at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Shout out for our deal, $1 for a week, and then you can get in on our yearly half-off deal if you sign up for that. You can check that out right now. But this is basically what I found this week is James Franklin on Thursday said this is the best defense they faced this year. And to me, the context of that is the defensive scheme and the players work really well together. Ohio State, you see them on the field right now. That collection of talent is better. Overall, the end product of the Ohio State player and talent is better, but the scheme is doing less for them. In this particular defense, they do some NFL level concepts where they will switch in zone coverages. They play routes instead of grass, and they're able to anticipate and attack different areas of the field to get those interceptions, because they're not just spot dropping. They're not just like, hey, I've got this area. I'm going to wait until somebody comes into my area, and then I'm going to pick up that player. They're anticipating where the routes are coming, and they're reading it from that perspective. And that makes them very challenging. But the athletes doing that, while they have great instincts, they are not the same level of athlete as the Ohio State defense that Penn State played earlier this year. They can do some more basic things at Ohio State because they've got great athletes. The synergy of all of this, I think, is really what it is in terms of why this defense is so good. Last thing, I know you and I were watching film, and I wanted to point this out because I went back and I looked. All but one of the 6 players that play in the box, the 4 defensive tackle or the 4 defensive linemen and the 2 linebackers, all of them are 4 years or have had 4 years of college football or more. only the will linebacker number 6 is a redshirt sophomore. So it's a veteran group up front, and I think they do a lot to protect that secondary so they can do so many different things on the coverage front, which brings us back to the interior of the offensive line. Penn State likes to run zone, and when they struggle to run that on the interior, they do struggle to run the ball traditionally with the tackles. Even last week against Purdue, wasn't necessarily successful running between the tackles. What you saw, and I know you mentioned your key matchup, what's the result? Do you think Katron Allen and Nick Singleton can get involved in a big way in this game?
Yeah, I think when you start moving Minnesota's defensive line on the interior, it opens up the run game and the entirety of it. If you start getting stuffed in the middle, you have to resort to outside zone. We've seen us do a little bit of speed option, and it's just about getting your guys in space. And I still think, like we said, we have better athletes.
Yeah.
Andy Kotonicki knows his athletes are better than Minnesota's athletes on defense. So that is where maybe you want to get in space. I would expect them to try to get outside a little bit, especially if they are not finding success really going up the middle there. So I'm excited to see if we can get it going. And I think if you can get Nick Singleton with some explosive carries and then allow Katron Allen to really just kind of finish out the game and chug out those 4, 5, 6 yard carries, then you're living in a good place. And I think this game could look a lot like Wisconsin, where it's close up until halftime. You start to make them one-dimensional, and then you are able to really run the ball. And I think that's the world you want to get into if you are Penn State.
Do we see more Nick Singleton this week? Because obviously against Purdue, the offense was done basically a quarter and a half early. And the final drive was really kind of pass-oriented. So I think he ended with 6 carries. Do you think we see him get into the double digits today? Do they need that from him? And then on top of that, how do you think they've done at getting him into space? Do you think that seems to me something that they've focused on this year? Do you think it's been successful and something they can build upon as we get closer and closer to that playoff where it is a real threat, whether it's run or pass, getting Nick Singleton in space that scares the other team?
Well, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton combined only had 13 carries last week. So I definitely expect that number to go up. I would say over 25 carries total for them to combined. So I think they're going to get a lot more involved. And I do think they have done a better job. Andy Kotonicki's done a great job getting Nick Singleton the ball in space. We kind of saw it later last year, Michigan State, where he was out at wide receiver. We got the ball out to him. Tyler Warren had a nice block, and Nick Singleton down the sideline, 60 yards. So we've seen Singleton's ability and what he can do when you get him the ball in space. And Kotonicki's done a lot better job. I think he wants to continue to. I mean, you're never satisfied with where you're at.
Yeah.
But I think he can do even a better job, especially these last couple weeks, not having that explosiveness from Nick Singleton in the run game. We've seen the impact and just overall the productivity of Penn State's run game in the second half of the season isn't even close to what it looked like in the first half.
The last thing I'm curious about in this particular game, I guess there's 2 things. They're kind of related, though. What are the wrinkles in the run game? Because there's always, is it a wide split where the tackle is an extra 1.5 feet away from the guard? And then, of course, where in the world is Warren? Where on the field is he? Do you think we see something new this week? Do they need to bust something out against this particular team to add to the Tyler Warren playbook? Does he call the play, run on the field, snap the ball to himself, throw it up to Drew Aller, who then throws it back to him? What's the next layer of what another thing? Does he block for himself on a play?
Something new is probably coming, but I think overall you're going to see what you've seen. They will get him the ball 2 times on the beginning on that first drive, get him involved, get him feeling good and warm, and then continue to force feed him the ball. Guaranteed we will see him at quarterback anywhere from 3 to 6 times probably.
Yeah.
And after Ohio State, it seems like Andy Kotonicki said to himself, I will never let a goal line opportunity pass up and not give the ball to Tyler Warren. And why wouldn't you? 6'6", 265 pounds.
Yeah.
And you're on the 1 yard line, and it adds, and you think about it, you can add another blocker. Because normally when the quarterback is handing the ball off, that's one less blocker that you have. You take that out of the equation. Tyler's just catching it and running.
Yeah.
You add a running back in. Katron Allen can block out of the backfield. It opens up more and more things for the offense. So I think we will see a healthy dose of Tyler Warren early and often and at quarterback.
And it also really creates true option and conflict situations because a running back, even if they don't block and they go out into the flat, now you've got to make decisions about leverage and how many players are dedicated. Are there free gaps now? All that stuff. I absolutely agree with you agree with you there. Bonus thought here. Something you mentioned the other day and I want to rephrase it into a way that I think is interesting to the conversation we just had. We saw in 2022 the T formation that is now in football. I saw an NFL team use it the other day, even if they motioned out of it. We've seen other teams use the T formation. Is Tyler Warren becoming a popular trend-setting situation where other teams are now putting their tight end in at the goal line? Do you think that's something that we're going to see going forward, whether it's in the NFL or in college?
It's funny. I actually talked about that on my pregame show, and I said after Tyler Warren leaves, why not do the same thing with Luke Reynolds or with someone that's, they don't have the same skill set necessarily. No one is Tyler Warren. He's one of the best players in all of college football. But no matter what, do you want to snap it to a 6'5", 6'6", 250-plus pound man?
Yeah.
And because normally you don't want to do, the only other guy that fits that description is your quarterback sometimes, you have a Drew Aller.
Yeah.
But you don't want to really take that risk with Drew Aller consistently. Why not do that with a tight end and let them jump over the top? Let that defense have to stop someone that much bigger.
Yeah.
I do think we will continue to see it more and more. We've seen teams start to go the running back route, and I think they're starting to find out, okay, maybe if we have a bigger body, and especially if you're close to the goal line, let's give it a shot. So I do think we will try to come up with something similar next year, and my guess would be that it would be with Luke Reynolds.
You mentioned there's something that I've been really impressed by, and I haven't wanted to give it like the hot take treatment. I've been trying not to. But Tyler Warren is one of the best players on the Penn State offense at reading and setting up his own blocks. He's been very good on those quarterback powers of waiting until the blocks are there, not outrunning his formation and his blocking. And that's a part of this, especially at the goal line, that I think has been really beneficial, is he's not too antsy back there where he's waiting and he's ready. And then there's something, if bleep hits the fan, he can just jump over the pile or land on Khalil Dinkins or something like that and crowd surf into the end zone. That is a skill that I think is underrated on the fact that he's a great receiver and can understand pass concepts and throw the football kind of. There's just a lot of layers to his abilities. Finding a guy that has that at the goal line, and then kind of wrapping this back and finishing off this thought with going back to the T formation. The reason it kind of died, it didn't really evolve. There was a solve for it, and then Penn State wasn't able to find a new iteration. Penn State's short yardage situation has iterated from Drew Aller, 6'5", 237-pound quarterback, sneaking the ball, the fake sneak with Tyler Warren, the fake sneak that was a pass to Katron Allen, and then now Tyler, of course, wrapping in Tyler Warren or Bo Prabula in all these short yardage situations. So they have found different ways to adapt and evolve in that particular area, which is an area that gets solved. I feel like it's solved pretty quickly in terms of like blocking, tackling, matchups, and leverage in the defense.
Yeah, I forget who it was. It was one of the offensive linemen or tight ends mentioned how when they hear the defense when Tyler Warren is back there at quarterback, they're all just screaming, yelling, like trying to figure out what to do. And it just causes a lot of chaos. And someone that dynamic that is deceivingly fast. Coach Franklin even said that this week. He doesn't look like it, but he will outrun your entire defense.
Yeah.
So he's glad he's on our team. Let's put it that way. But I think we will be able to emulate something that looks something similar like that in the future once Tyler Warren heads off to the NFL.
We're going to talk about the other side of the coin and the Penn State defense against the Minnesota offense. It is the but in this defense or in this game for Penn State coming up at 3:30 today. We're at the Field Burger and Tap. Come say hi to us. Join us here. Have some fries. Have a drink. Have a milkshake. Enjoy your pre-Thanksgiving weekend. You got to train for that day. And put in some training this afternoon coming in and expanding your insides by eating a bunch of great stuff at the Field Burger and Tap. We'll be back on the Penn State Tailgate Show, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships, 99.5, 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming online at the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Right now, it is the Coach's Corner.
Press conferences are boring, right? That's why we've set aside the most important stuff for you. It's Coach's Corner, powered by Bobby Rahal Honda on West College Avenue, State College. Online at Bobby Rahal Honda of StateCollege.com.
The Nittany Lions rocked the Purdue Boilermakers 1 week ago, 49-10 in a not-so-competitive matchup. Throughout the second half, head coach James Franklin was able to rotate in a boatload of younger players from Tyseer, Denmark, to Max Granville to get them live game reps. While it may be a positive thing long term, James still sees some negatives with how the non-starters played in West Lafayette.
I think we take a lot of pride in being a developmental program. You know, when the 3s and 4s got in there, the experience, I think, is really good for them and good for us. But we did not play up to the standard. Guys got in there, they got to be able to execute and play at a high level. And it's a tremendous opportunity that they're getting, and they need to approach it that way. So making sure guys that are preparing the right way as if they were the starter every single week, so when their number's called, they're ready.
The star of the show for PSU was Abdul Carter. Number 11 was all over the field, from a half dozen near sacks to chase down tackles. The soon-to-be first-round NFL draft pick could have really filled up the stat sheet were it not for a perceived dozen-plus holding calls that were not called against the Purdue offensive line. Franklin hinted at how, even while being held, Abdul is an impact player.
Guy is playing with phenomenal motor. I mean, the play he made on the screen was phenomenal. For us, we try to spend a lot of time talking about real football people studying the tape. NFL scouts, GMs, other college coaches. And when you watch the tape, the guy is impactful, whether it's sacks, whether it's tackles for loss, whether it's holding calls, whether it is obvious that they have a specific plan in how they're trying to limit his impact, keeping tight ends in, keeping running backs in, always sliding in his direction so there's a double team between the tackle and the guard. He is impacting the game.
Tyler Warren is not alone in the tight end room. 44 has been a possible Heisman candidate all year for the Nittany Lions, but on Saturday, we got to see more from his position group teammate, Luke Reynolds. It's safe to say James is pretty satisfied with the tight ends room.
Yeah, we love Luke's development and what he's been able to do this year, and that will continue to evolve as the season goes on. But again, when you got Tyler Warren in that room, and Khalil's a guy that has done some great things for us as well. He was all over the tape that I showed the team on Sunday blocking. He blocked extremely well. Obviously, as you guys know, is a threat in the passing game. So that's a really competitive room.
In just a couple hours, the Nittany Lions take the field against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Normally, we look for elder statesmen for the stars on the opponent's team, but in the case of Minnesota, it is a true freshman that we need to watch out for on the field against Drew Aller.
Their true freshman safety, number 3, Coy Parrish, been very impressed with him. I think he's got 5 interceptions. Played really well in high school, I think it was the MVP of the Army All-American game. He's flying around, making big plays for them. As a true freshman, he's been impressive. He's been impressive.
That was your Penn State Coaches Corner. More from the Tailgate Show in a moment.
Hi, but there are 2 ways, according to the Big Ten's exhaustive analysis, that Penn State can still make the Big Ten title game. Here's scenario 1, if you're watching. If not, I'll read it to you. It's Oregon finishes 9-0. Indiana and Penn State both finish 8-1 in Big Ten play, and Ohio State finishes 7-2. That would mean, of course, it loses to Michigan next week after beating Indiana this week in the Horseshoe. That is the most likely path for Penn State of the 2. And again, just to be clear, Oregon's already in. Penn State's only, most likely path, not only, but most likely path would be for Ohio State to beat Indiana this weekend and then lose to Michigan next weekend. It's not out of the question. It's highly unlikely. Ohio State is an 11.5-point favorite over Indiana, I believe, this week in Columbus. I'm going to pull that up just to be sure. I don't know if you saw, but Seth McLaughlin, the likely All-American center, is now out for the year with the torn Achilles. So that offensive line takes yet another hit.
Yeah.
That was reported.
That's a
overnight.
rough injury, too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's an extremely talented player. It's terribly unfortunate that for that to happen to him this late in the season. But at FanDuel right now, Ohio State a 13.5-point favorite over Indiana. And I don't know if they have a Michigan line up. They do. Ohio State favored by 24. So Penn State would have to get the Buckeyes to cover 13.5 against the Hoosiers, and then not only lose to Michigan, but not cover 23.5 in a game that is,
the defensive bus breaks down on the way, and then they have to play people from the stands. I don't know like how that works where you're 24-point favorite.
Yeah, and don't forget that game is also in Columbus. So despite the offensive line issues, very hard to see that taking place. But that is the most likely scenario, because scenario 2, as we're going to put up on the screen here now, is Penn State finishes. Obviously, it wins out. Indiana, Ohio State both finish 7-2. That would mean Indiana loses to Ohio State and Purdue, and Ohio State loses to Michigan after beating Indiana this week. So there are your options. Ohio State beats Indiana, loses to Michigan, or Indiana loses to Ohio State and Purdue, and Ohio State loses to Michigan after beating Indiana. So do not change your travel plans to Indianapolis if you already don't have them set, because
the offensive line conversation is interesting, because I don't think Will Howard is exceptional at extending plays. He can run and he can move, but I didn't notice him being, like a guy that can, when I did the data study and looked at the film before the game, he doesn't have that CJ Stroud in him where he can roll out of a pocket. And Stroud did this a little bit at Ohio State, does it more now, of being able to operate the offense outside of structure. So maybe that is something, although the Michigan defense is so banged up as well that it feels like if they were at full.
Blaze Alexander Family Dealership, celebrating more than 40 years of service to the community. Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships has a vehicle to fit your budget and transportation needs. Home of the $1,000 lowest price guarantee, with 20 locations throughout Pennsylvania. Also broadcasting throughout Pennsylvania, the Penn State Football Tailgate Show on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel and on 99.5 The Bus here locally. We are now talking about the Penn State defense against the Minnesota offense. If you want to have your thoughts heard in the chat on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, that's our best way to communicate live on the show. And so far, everyone is watching the Ohio State game. Of the last 6 comments, 5 of them are about the Ohio State game, because the Buckeyes are now in the red zone. And I'm doing a mild play-by-play here. It was 7-7, and it looks like a turnover there by Will Howard. So that's pretty impressive. That big swing in momentum, because they were about to go up by 2 score, or at least a score. So this one's staying close here between Indiana. I wanted to say Minnesota because that's what we're talking about here on this show, but Indiana and Ohio State tied 7-7 in the second quarter. We'll keep you updated through that. Around the Big Ten, Landon, has just been the whole show today, because that's what everyone's looking at.
Will Howard, do you think he's a Heisman candidate? I've seen.
No.
Some people think Dylan Gabriel is too. I don't think it's any Big Ten quarterback.
So let's have a conversation about the Heisman, and let's have a conversation about postseason awards in general, because this does tie back to James Franklin talking about Tyler Warren, Abdul Carter. He's been asked about these players up for these national awards, and he says these awards should be more than about just stats. So there's 2 things that can get you an award. 1, vibes. So if you're a quarterback, hashtag QB wins. And then 2, stats. So Will Howard could have the conversation that he has the QB wins, except he lost to Dylan Gabriel. Dylan Gabriel throws a lot of times in that offense. A lot of them are screens and then a lot of catch and run, but he does throw the ball a lot, and he throws the ball down the field effectively. So he has the stats to back it up of, hey, this is an exceptional quarterback from beginning to end. Will Howard doesn't really have either of those. And then if you watch the film, you're like, oh, okay, so none of these things really add up to a Heisman campaign. The only thing he's got going for him is the jersey and 1 loss. So, yeah, I would go for Travis Hunter myself, given the fact that he's a genuinely unique player. Here's the thing. I forget Heisman's first name back in the person it's named after was an offensive lineman. So the meaning of the award is whatever we decide it is, but it's supposed to be the most unique or genuine player. John William Heisman. Thank you. John. I thought it was John Williams for a second. I'm like, why are we talking about music? Why are we talking about Star Wars? Anyway, it's about the most exceptional player in college football, the best player in college football. And best is subjective, but I think I'm also tired of it always just going to the quarterback with the most stats. So I guess, who would you put in that conversation?
I mean, it's either Travis Hunter or Ashton Jonty for the running back for Boise State for sure.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely a conversation. People say, hey, every time they put up the stats for Travis Hunter, it's how many snaps total he has played, and I
Yeah.
get it. Like, that's impressive, and he does play both sides of the ball at an extremely high level. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just a Colorado hater. Maybe I don't want that. Maybe I don't want that for Deion Sanders, and now he's interviewing with Jerry Jones and whatnot. Who knows what's gonna? Maybe I'm just kind of a hater on that whole situation. But
I don't disagree.
And I think Tyler Warren really he should be invited. He should be invited.
Yeah.
To the I don't think Tyler Warren should win the Heisman necessarily. I just think the
should
two
be in the
guys
conversation.
but he deserves to be in the conversation. He's definitely in the top 5, so he should be invited to New York. It's New York, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, New York.
I think it's still New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those conversations of we have not seen a tight end do what Tyler Warren does. So let's talk about like his NFL draft profile. Do you think he can catch the ball and get yards after the catch? Well, look at the number of yards he has after the catch. Look at the way he runs, like we just talked about in the last segment. His ability to set up blocks and run as a actual runner in an offense. Penn State is using him as the option quarterback it needs to make some of these plays run. He's genuinely playing actual quarterback in this offense. They just need to add in a couple more throws, and then that's purely what it is.
So we got all these new school NFL head coaches and offensive coordinators. Every team wants the young new guru that's like this like creative mind. Those guys have kind of taken over. They would all love Tyler Warren, a Mike McDaniel. That's the defense. No,
you're thinking of you're thinking Mike McDonald. Mike
McDaniel is the Dolphins head coach,
and
I mean the Chiefs, Andy Reid, any of them, Shanahan. They would love to have a Tyler Warren. So that's why I don't think I could see Tyler Warren slipping out of the first round. There's too many offensive coordinators in the NFL and head coaches that would be too excited for what they could do out there with Tyler Warren in their offense.
Yeah. And a genuinely exceptional play. So tight ends, if you're in the first round, you're either an athletic freak or you are somehow special in a way from a high school, college production. Like you're an all-around player. You can do all of it. Thinking back to TJ Hawkinson going in the first round, or some of those other players that have been first round draft picks. That's what Tyler Warren. I mean, that's an exceptionally high bar to be a safety or a tight end that goes in the first round. It means you are special in some way, and I think that is a credit to him that he is absolutely worthy of that conversation. A guy that might have had that conversation for him at some point is KJ Winston on the defensive side, which is the clunkiest transition I could have gone to talk about the defense today against the Minnesota offense. So a lot of what you and I do is kind of try to inform people on this show of what Minnesota is or what the opponent is. So let's start with that and then talk about the Penn State defense in relation to it. What did you see from Minnesota watching film this week and before?
Starting out with their quarterback, Max Brosmer. He is a fifth-year transfer. We were talking about this. The fifth-year transfer that's the new thing. There's a couple guys. I mean, Bo Nix went to Oregon last year. Yep. Michael Penix went to Washington, and it was very successful. It was the first year that was a big movement. So this guy was at New Hampshire for 4 years, and then took his talents to Minnesota. So kind of the Walmart version of those good quarterbacks.
Great value.
Yeah, it was good value for Minnesota to get a guy like that. And he's good. 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and he is a reliable quarterback that we have kind of seen already this year. I think he's a little bit worse than Luke Altmaier and very around the same as Braden Locke.
Yeah.
And so maybe a little bit better than Locke, I think. And
interesting.
So I think so. I mean, it depends. I mean, Locke, since we've seen him, Locke had to come in. Obviously, Locke wasn't a starter.
Yeah.
He might, I don't know where Wisconsin's doing all right now.
Yeah, they're doing good.
Yeah. So, but nonetheless, I think we've seen this offense before. An offense that at the end of the day wants to run the ball. And if you make them one-dimensional, they will abandon it. If you stop the run game, they'll be okay with getting out of it. And when you start to get an offense to abandon the run game and you have an elite pass rush, and especially an elite pass rusher and Abdul Carter, that's a world you want to live in if you're this Penn State defense.
Yeah.
So take away the run first, make Brosmer pass the ball, and I think you got a good opportunity to start to feel like that Wisconsin second half where they can't do much offensively. And I think that's where Penn State can get into a blowout, or at least win by 17 to 20 points if they take away their run. Now, if they don't and they allow them to run the ball, stay in the game, control the clock, then I think this could be a close game. So it really could go either way for Penn State. But I'm thinking of this in a very similar light to Illinois and Wisconsin.
I have some I think everybody has some scars when it comes to football, emotional scars, whether it's as a fan or for me as an analyst, having to do games in the past, watching games and working for other institutions before I worked for On3, working a game again that Minnesota was, Minnesota versus somebody else. I think it was Rutgers at the time or somebody, and Minnesota's base offense was 6 offensive linemen. And just that's hard to watch. I'm sorry, Landon. I know you're an offensive lineman, but there's 5 of you on the field already. It's greedy to have a 6th, and it makes it very predictable what's about to happen on a play. So that's where I'm stuck. And I kind of try to help fans evolve past some of these things of Illinois 2021 isn't coming back every single time you see Illinois. And Minnesota 2019 isn't coming back in Minnesota 2024 in the exact same way because these are different players, different schemes. But at the same time, all I'm trying to say is they will actually throw the ball, which is not a PJ Fleck thing. I'm at least appreciative that they will make it interesting at some point in this game from an offensive perspective.
They will. They'll get the ball to number 9. Have I shared with you? I think I shared with you my Minnesota 2019 story. The referee.
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
I don't think so.
Back, I'm in high school. I'm a recruit. This is my junior year going into COVID. So it's 2019 after Penn State loses to Minnesota at Minnesota in 2019. That basically derailed the season. We had beaten Michigan, so we were going to have 1 loss against Ohio State in 2019.
Yep.
But we lost to Minnesota, and that kind of derailed everything. Well, there was an offensive pass interference call. We threw it down. We needed a touchdown to pretty much cap off the game, and we got it down to the 1-yard line, except there was an offensive pass interference, I believe, on KJ Hamler. It was pretty controversial.
Yeah,
I forget who was on.
Yeah, so it was – I think it was Dotson. It was on Dotson. No, you're right. It was on Hamler because they got the ball to Dotson, I think, in that moment.
Absolutely. And so Penn State was getting ready to score in the game. Offensive pass interference gets brought back, just kind of setting the scene. Okay.
I remember it now.
Yeah,
so there was an offensive pass interference on Pat Freiermuth.
On Pat Freiermuth,
that took away a score.
That took away it was a score.
The end of the game is when they were trying to get the ball to Dotson, and I think he dropped it, or there was a defensive pass interference they didn't call, or something like that.
Yeah. Long story short, after that season, I'm at my school. I'm at Good Counsel in Maryland. I'm wearing some Penn State gear, working out, getting ready to commit to Penn State. And there's an AAU basketball tournament. One of the refs comes out, and he says, "Hey, do you go to Penn State?" And I said, "No, not yet. I'm thinking about going." And he looks at me and he goes, you know Franklin? And I said, "Well, yeah, I've met him a couple times." And he goes, "Remember that Minnesota game this year?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, I was the ref. I was the ref that threw that offensive pass interference that wiped away some points for Penn State." And he was bragging to me. And I looked at my friend. We're working out. We're just getting some water out in the main area. Just get caught by this random guy.
Yeah.
And then he makes me take his number down. And he's like, "Yeah, call Coach Franklin." He's like, "Let him know I was the guy that threw that penalty." And he was proud. He was
like
pronouncing
a mafia boss move.
It was one of the craziest things I've ever experienced that I remember telling Franklin. He was not very happy about it. He was like, "What?" And so I still have the guy's number. So we won't expose him.
What an interesting reaction to be like, and then tell him it was me that killed his family. What in the world?
It was, that was, I always, on my podcast, I always give a story of the team we played, whether recruitment or me playing them. And that was my Minnesota story.
So wrapping up here with you mentioned that if you can get this team away from running the football, they don't really have the horses in the passing game. Number 9 is their number 1 wide receiver, but everything feels less than threatening in the passing game. Is that fair to say? They don't have a lot of team speed from what I saw, and they don't seem to be a team that, unless Penn State makes a mistake, can threaten this team deep. So is this going to be another one of those? The game plan is against Penn State: throw the ball quick, run the ball, try to play ball control, dink and dunk your way down the field. Is that what you're seeing from this game plan from that side?
I think it is. And just watching their offense, that's what they like to do. They like to run the ball, and they like to do quick speed outs, hitches, where they just run 5 yards, turn around, get the ball into the flat. That's where this offense tries to thrive at, because like we just said, they don't have the speed to keep up with a Penn State defense. So they try to make sure that Penn State has to make routine tackles. I think that's the key today. If we are going to see the team that wants to run the ball and throw it short, number 1, maybe play a little bit closer, but number 2, you have to make those routine tackles so the routine plays don't turn into explosive plays for the Minnesota offense.
Yeah, and a lot of this, I think, it's Penn State based of if Penn State makes a mistake, then X happens. Not Minnesota forces something to happen because of X. One guy that I think can force a lot of those things for Penn State in the middle is Zane Durant. Any game where a team has to run the ball, I'm looking at number 28 and seeing, okay, right there, that's the X factor for this game. Can he get in the backfield? But a guy quickly becoming a part of that conversation is Lonzo Ford. Has also been excellent in run defense this year. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll get into around the Big Ten, 7-7 Ohio State. And, that's a big play. We'll talk about that on the way back here on the Penn State Coaches Show. We'll be back on the Penn State Coaches Show, powered by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5, 107.5, The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel.
How crazy is it, man? Just a couple of weeks. You were talking, we had our meeting last week, and you were like, hey, what are we doing for National Signing Day? And
It's more than just football at Penn State. Here's This Week in Penn State Sports, brought to you by Bobby Rahal Lexus in Lewistown. Get ready to experience luxury like never before at Bobby Rahal Lexus of Lewistown. We are Nittany Valley's award-winning Lexus dealership at 425 Electric Avenue. Visit us on the web at BobbyRahalLexusofLewistown.com.
A 10-year NCAA championship appearance streak broken. Olivia Dorner and Maiko Ushijima are the first NCAA qualifiers for the program in doubles tennis since 2012-2013. The doubles dream team lost to Colorado in the round of 32 on Wednesday, but this is not the end for the junior tandem as the 2025 season awaits. Mike Rhodes and Penn State men's basketball are rolling after a comeback win against the Purdue Fort Wayne Mastodons 102-89. Ace Baldwin Jr. led the way with a 25-point, 11 assists, 7 rebound, near triple-double. The super senior continues his fine scoring form, shooting 4 for 5 from 3 and 7 for 8 from the charity stripe. Nick Kern Jr.'s emphatic windmill dunk at the end of the game slammed to reality the third 100-point game and fifth 80-point game of the season by Rhodes' crew. Both, by the way, are first in program history through 5 games. Ace & Co. are on the road to Daytona Beach for the Sunshine Slam starting on Monday. The Slam will be live on Bigfoot Country Legends 103.7, 104.3. The men are making their way down to Florida, where the Lady Lions already are. PSU took on Marshall in Orlando on Thursday and rocked the Herd 74-59. Gracie Merkel continues her as-advertised first year in Happy Valley with a 28-point, 11-rebound double-double. Gracie is now averaging 21 points and 9 rebounds per game for Carolyn Keeger's squad. Their next matchup against Georgia tips off about now on Pop 93.3 at the ESPN HQ down in Orlando, Florida. That was This Week in Penn State Sports. Back to the Tailgate Show in a moment.
Taking care of your roof. There's only one thing you need to.
How crazy is it, man? Just a couple of weeks. You were talking, we had our meeting last week, and you were like, hey, what are we doing for National Signing Day? And I'm like, I'm not even thinking about that. And then I'm like, oh, that's 3 weeks away. We should probably think about that.
Yeah.
Because it's crazy this year. Of course, December 4th, I believe, the first week of December instead of the third week of December, which changes the calendar greatly because you always used to bring in guys for official visits in December, do your banquet and have everybody around the program, have the family reunion, all that kind of stuff. But now all of a sudden you don't have that. And also there was a question on the board. I meant to send it to T. Frank to put it up on the screen, but I forgot. Somebody asked if James Franklin was going to get to go see Andrew Olish and before signing day. And those are really off the board right now. There's no in-home visits until January, which is kind of pointless in the recruiting aspect of it. He'll go out, see those families, many of which will already have their child on campus as an early enrollee. But you take out that window of in-home visits. You remember Joe Paterno going to Terrell Pryor, all those things that always used to crop up in December. It was one of the more interesting things, even though I'm not sure a ton changed on those visits. They're just out now. So after the Maryland game, that's it. Like you're going into a quiet period, into a dead period. It does open up in December, which helps a little bit and was probably something we didn't talk about very much to begin with, because I thought December was all dead, but it's actually, there's technicalities. You can have guys in, but you're not going to be able to host recruits for the playoff game. If Penn State has a playoff game, you cannot give away tickets to postseason events, which is an NCAA rule. It's going to affect all of them. Doesn't mean that recruits can't come and buy tickets and show up and watch the game. But it's, if you're expecting an additional recruiting weekend based on
you don't get a freebie to expand the lead over teams that didn't make a playoff game.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So we will see what happens with how they get around that, because I think there will be recruits that make that trip, but you're going to have to pay for it. Like that's going to be a whole different thing. And you can't actually, bring them to the recruiting lounge and do all that hosting and things like that. But actual recruiting in the class of 2025, Zahir Mathis, the defensive end from Imhotep Charter in Philly, decommitted from Ohio State yesterday. That's an interesting one because I don't believe he has a landing spot in mind, and I don't believe it's going to be Penn State.
Interesting.
I will hedge a little bit and say Penn State's approach with in-state prospects is the reason that I'm still following this, because they don't want to be beaten in state. This is a top 5 prospect in state. He did drop quite a bit in the on 300 rankings yesterday, which was probably expected if you've been following along. But that's an interesting one to me, because all of a sudden that's a wide open 2 weeks from National Signing Day situation. Zahir Mathis decommitted from Ohio State. I think Ohio State's still in the picture. I think there are some other schools that are just haven't been around that will end up in it. I think there's a lot of play here from an NIL standpoint, and I don't know that it's online with what they expect it to be. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks for Zahir Mathis. We'll see if he pops up anywhere. Imhotep lost to St. Joe's Prep in the state playoffs last weekend, so they've got open weekends to go visit other places. So we will see what happens with Mr. Mathis. Again, I said it a couple weeks ago on the show. I don't expect him in Penn State, but I'll hedge a little bit about that because he's an in-state prospect. But
leads to an Ohio State score right before the half. It's 14-7. That's where we're starting, and we're probably just going to talk about this game in around the Big Ten, because I don't think anyone really cares about, Purdue, Michigan State 24-17 on Friday.
I will say.
Really?
Well, we got something. Maybe not that game, but I will say this. Would you say our best win right now is Illinois?
Yes, that was the one I was going to get to next.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Illinois, who's ranked 25th right now, is down 9-7 against Rutgers at the moment. They're down by 8. So that would be bad. That would mean that Penn State would then no longer have any ranked wins.
Yeah.
And the ESPN narrative continues on, which, we can take this for a second. We'll get back to Ohio State, Indiana in 1 second.
Yeah.
Did you get the chance to see it all, what happened in the 12-team playoff selection on Tuesday night, where basically people were saying, ESPN analysts were saying that Penn State doesn't have any real wins and that UCLA was close. Yeah. And it was a lot of Penn State fans weren't very happy with ESPN after that. And it feels like there's other teams, Texas in the SEC, that very similarly to Penn State doesn't have any huge wins, and they're not really getting ragged on. So I just think it's interesting, but it doesn't seem to have impacted the voters that actually matter too much to this point. So that's the good news. Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, ESPN, do they have a stake in the SEC network?
Oh yeah, they do.
Yeah, that
they're
part of the media package that is part of the SEC. Yep. Yeah, I don't really care what Booger McFarland has to say. I didn't care what Booger McFarland had to say at any point in his career, whether he's talking about the NFL or not. He has said enough things on the airwaves for me to go, I don't really need to consider his opinion on a whole lot, considering he's also a dude from LSU. So there's absolutely no bias in former players talking about other football teams. I think that there's obviously merit to the idea that Penn State has not played any top 25 teams. I'm just going to say it again because Minnesota is a good football team. Are they a perfect team? Absolutely not. But there is a world where it's not the all or nothings. It's not, are you in the top 15? It's, are you a competitive team that can do some things? And the Big Ten, the middle of the Big Ten, Rutgers is in the middle of the Big Ten, 6-4, playing a 7-3 team. And we see they're all pretty good and they're cannibalizing each other. Like they are just eating their own because they play a 9-game conference schedule and they don't have these intense stratification without Michigan being good this year. So, okay, both things are true. Penn State's played good teams. Have they played any great teams and won? Not really. But they have a good strength of schedule. They played some tough defenses, mostly good defenses, and they've won games. So I'm so tired of yo-yoing back and forth between opinions and having to argue and litigate every single little detail. But that's where we are because that's we're at the end of the college football season, and it's not we haven't eliminated 3/4 of the teams, so we are just getting more of this.
To round out the Big Ten, I'm sure everybody's very curious. Iowa beating Maryland 13-0.
Okay.
I think, and I said this earlier, I think Maryland is on the same worry level as me about Purdue. Pretty much the same there.
What has Mike Locksley done to deserve this long of a leash as a head coach?
Yeah, I guess he coached in the SEC. that was like the hope. And I think I told this before, but I'll never. And maybe I'll have to tell it next week. But after they beat us in COVID, and I was already committed here, and they were still trying to recruit me, and he FaceTimed me with Tulia Tagovailoa and was showing me the tape of them whooping up on Penn State. That was his recruiting pitch to me. So maybe that's why it went that way.
Yeah. Apparently.
But yeah, no, he's not. No, Maryland's been struggling for a while. They got to a point where it's like, oh, okay, is Maryland going to do? No.
Right.
Crash and burn.
They got to a competitive point, and then they have been quickly retreating away from that for a while now, and have been losing great players. Like I don't want to just bring up off the top of my head the fact that Chop Robinson spent a year there and is like, nah, I'm going to go to Penn State where he was considering the first time and then became a first-round draft pick. Like there hasn't been a lot of evidence of growth or plan, like a great plan for Maryland. I find the East Coast teams in the Big Ten, like the Seaboard teams, to be very interesting in how they have really existed over the last decade. The one everyone wants to talk about, 14-7. It was a very close game. Lots of turnovers in the rain. Sack, fumble, an interception, and then right before the halftime, a fumbled punt, return to the 5-yard line, set up an Ohio State score to essentially ice the half. They go up 14-7 at halftime. I know we've been doing this and we keeping an eye on that. Is this a competitive game, or is this a game that Ohio State has been not getting the scores even though they've been moving the football? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think Ohio State is clearly more talented, but it looks like Indiana is putting up a good fight, especially with their defense. They've been put in some not so great situations so far to start this game, but I'm still impressed by them, and I think they look kind of how everybody expected. They came out, drove down the field, and scored after Ohio State went 3 and out, and should be a good game the rest of the way. It sucks that Indiana had to give up essentially what was a blocked punt, and I will tell you that if Franklin will give us this stat every meeting, it's about 90% of the time if you have a blocked punt, you lose the game.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that.
Wasn't necessarily blocked, but same result.
Yeah.
So yes, it is around 90%. Good luck to Indiana, but it's better for us if Ohio State wins. If Michigan can find a way
this is the conversation we were having off camera, and there's a lot of root for chaos. Root against Ohio State is kind of the default for a lot of people. It is really important for Penn State that Ohio State wins this, right? Because if Indiana wins, Ohio State's going to stay ranked ahead of Penn State, right? So now Penn State is the 4th Big Ten team no matter what. So eliminating the competition on your level of the consideration is more important than your rival losing in this situation. And it just feels foreign to everybody in the room.
Yeah, it's actually been that way this whole year. In every big matchup, Penn State fans technically should be rooting for Ohio State. It was the same way against Oregon earlier this year.
Right.
We wanted Ohio State to win. We want them to beat Indiana today. And yes, if they beat Indiana today and then lose to Michigan next week, we find ourselves in the Big Ten championship.
Yeah.
So that'd be fun. That'd be cool, kind of unexpected.
Read that back again to me.
If we beat, because then, so if Indiana loses today to Ohio State, then we have, I forget why, but we have the tiebreaker over Indiana.
I think it's strength of schedule, common opponents.
Yeah, it's common, yeah. And then we would need Ohio State to lose to Michigan.
Okay,
that would give them two losses, and then it would be us and Indiana head-to-heads who gets to go to play Oregon, and we have the head-to-head tiebreaker over Indiana.
Yeah, you and I watched that Minnesota and Michigan game for a little bit. Back then when they were healthy, you think that's happening? You think that's happening to have Michigan beat Ohio State?
No, it's not going to happen.
Way too far ahead?
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So it doesn't matter at this point, and I'd rather root for Indiana, I think, as most are, even though, as I said, doesn't really make sense mathematically, but
whatever.
Can't help it. Can't help it. You're rooting against Ohio State to lose. That's
You're
how it
just
works.
rooting against your own happiness at that point because you want them to win, but they're not. If they don't, I guess maybe that's hedging. Maybe that's a good hedge, right? Let's talk a little bit more about the Penn State game coming up here in about an hour and a half. where they're going to play Minnesota. Again, all eyes are on this game that's at halftime. But it's very important that Penn State takes care of business against Minnesota. And we didn't really get too deep into the defense because, again, it feels very simple. It's rinse and repeat of the defense has to stop the run and then has to do what they do each week. Elliot Washington didn't finish the game last week. I don't believe he was out of practice that we saw. What does that do in your mind to the cornerback situation and rotation here heading into this game? Do you think that they'll be fine? Do you think that they'll need to change some things? Do you think that will have an impact on this game?
Yeah, I think they'll be all right, especially we talked about these are wide receivers from Minnesota that are not anywhere near lethal, or they're not going to hurt you, stretch you down the field, a group that lacks speed, really. So I think you're not going to miss Elliot Washington too much. And coming into the season, Coach Franklin said that he had 5-6 cornerbacks that he felt confident in starting. So that's good. You got a lot of depth down the road, and now you look at games like this when people get hurt later in the year, and you say, hey, we still got 4 or 5 guys I think we can play. Great. I think Zion Tracy's been playing great. I think A.J. Harris has been playing well. And really both transfers, A.J. Harris and Jalen Kimber, I think you can label them hits for Coach Franklin out of the transfer portal. And it feels like Coach Franklin's been, hasn't dipped into the transfer portal too much as other programs.
Right.
And seems like he hits a lot.
Yeah,
I would say there's a lot of great additions. Alonzo Ford coming on. We got him from Old Dominion, and he has been a really impactful player this year. So we continue to add people that are making big impacts. So shout out to Coach Franklin and the staff for it's a whole new element of almost being a GM essentially of really having to evaluate talent that's going to play for you now. And sure enough, they really are. So great investments by the coaching staff there.
The availability report is out. Elliot Washington is out for this game, and Julian Fleming, who we didn't see at practice on Wednesday, is questionable. So something that happened with Fleming, interestingly, I don't remember anything happening to him in the game, so that must have happened during the week as far as his availability. Both of those players at important positions where Penn State on one side has a lot of depth and on the other side has a lot of questions. Do you think there could be a benefit of simplifying the receiver position and giving one guy more opportunities, giving a Liam Clifford more opportunities, or giving an Amari Evans more opportunities? Or is more always better at that position? Because it feels like you have 2 guys in the offense that are the primary pass catchers, and then everyone else gets like 1 or 2 chances a week, and there doesn't seem to be a chance to establish consistency, confidence, a rhythm. Is that do you agree with that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think when you're playing wide receiver by committee, it's hard. And when you get into a game like Ohio State where they take away the vocal point of your offense and Tyler Warren, it was kind of like, nobody stepped up. So you want to start to kind of train a guy to be the guy. And I think it's Trey Wallace. We've talked about this. He's the most talented. He has the skill set. We've seen him do it. And when they feed him the ball, it feels like good things happen. I think we can really get to him today and provide a little bit of a spark to this Penn State offense, and something that Drew Allard can be confident in throwing the ball his way.
There was a conversation this week as well about just generally the third pass catcher in the offense. Does it have to be a receiver? Can it be a second tight end? Can Khalil Dinkins or Luke Reynolds be a part of that conversation? And James Franklin, when he was asked about that on Monday, took that to say taking snaps away from Tyler Warren as the tight end targets. But if we're now talking about just receiver targets, playing a guy in again, specifically in my mind, the slot receiver, do you think that there's an avenue where, or is there a world where that would also be beneficial to balance out the field, having that third threat? Or do you really need a receiver specifically to do that for you?
I don't think you have to have one, and you can switch it up. But I think if Luke Reynolds is playing really well, Khalil Dinkins, they have both looked like they can start at tight end. You just have Tyler Warren there. Let's get them more involved, especially in the passing game. I mean, no one has shown the ability to be able to really break out outside of Trey Wallace. Let's get Luke Reynolds involved. He looks good. We talked about it. Looks like George Kittle. Reminds me so. It might be the dirty blonde hair coming out of the back of the helmet with the 85. But the way, watch Luke Reynolds today and tell me you don't see George Kittle. Yeah,
the way he moves, I think that you and I had that conversation. There is a resemblance in the mannerisms and the athletic profile is really, I think, the identifier there. We're going to come back with our predictions, our X factors and what we think is going to happen in this game. Penn State, Minnesota coming up at 3:30 here on the Penn State Football Tailgate Show. We'll be back, driven by Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships on 99.5, 107.5 The Bus, Bigfoot Country Legends, and streaming on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel.
Game predictions here for Penn State, Minnesota. Ryan, I do want to start with you on your prediction, and then we'll work our way to Fitz just by canonically how many points Penn State is going to score, not to give anything away. But Ryan, what do you think?
I want 24-17, and honestly, I'm still kind of thinking, like, how is Minnesota going to get 17 points in this game? Easily the best defense they've faced this season. I'm really excited, actually, to watch Ariante Ursi against Abdul Carter. These are two projected first-round picks, and Abdul Carter has been getting a ton of praise lately, and he's deserved it. He's been excellent. It's not just the numbers as far as a tackle for lost sack perspective, but how much of a hassle he is, and hurries and pressures and all those things. Well, he's going probably against the best offensive lineman he's seen this season. Am I wrong with that? Is anyone? Yeah, I can't think of a tackle that he's faced that's more coveted, I guess, than Ursi. So really curious to see how he does. But I also believe that Penn State's remaining defensive linemen, at least certainly the starters, Jay Thomas and Durant and Denai, they all seem to have matchup advantages. And really, what we've seen from is it Brosmer? Is that how we pronounce his last name?
The quarterback.
Yeah.
Sure.
When he's not under pressure, he's put up some decent numbers. But when he's under pressure, I think his analytics dropped to like 90th or something in the country.
Yep.
Like, it is a massive discrepancy there between what he's able to do with 3-4 seconds of time and what he's not able, or when he has to actually move around and make decisions on the fly. So I think that bodes really well for Penn State. I want 24-17. I wouldn't be shocked if it's more like a 28-14 or something like that. I played it a little bit conservative, but this is a game that Penn State, again, should control in the second half.
Yeah, I lied. Fitz, we're coming to you next. What's your score prediction, and how do you think this is going?
You talk about Darius Taylor and the multi-pronged attack that he can bring to you, because he's done really good on the ground, of course, but receiving, he's got 45 catches. It's just 312 yards. So just
I think
under
he's second with
catch.
50 targets.
Yeah, they throw to him a lot. So Penn State's second level defenders, and if they get that ball out in the flat, Penn State's defensive ends will have to tackle. And he's he's a good player. So I'm very curious how that happens. I believe someone said it in the chat to throw some screen. It's kind of that we hit that stretch a few weeks ago where you're playing teams that are just going to try and screen and draw you to death. And I think that Minnesota could end up in that avenue, which that's how I would attack Penn State if I probably had the lesser of the two talents. So in terms of prediction, I've got Penn State 31, Minnesota 13. I don't really see a scenario where Penn State's overlooking this one. I know we throw the trap game stuff around, and it is certainly the most difficult scenario / situation that they'll play in the last 4 games. But I think that the focus is clear. Penn State's done a nice job doing that 1-0 mantra every week, and it matters this time of year. So they understand that they can't slip up at all. You talk about the chatter and how much that means throughout the week with the selection show and everybody kind of being down on them. But there's one way to handle that, and that's just by winning. And I think Penn State's in a good spot to do that.
Yeah, and to me, again, you guys have said it all, but
lock it up. Here's the expert predictions for today's game.
Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships, celebrating more than 40 years of service to the community. Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships has a vehicle to fit your budget or transportation needs. Home of the $1,000 lowest price guarantee with 20 locations throughout Pennsylvania. Always appreciate Blaze Alexander Family Dealerships for being a sponsor here of the show and the sponsor of the car that I drive. I love my Mazda. That's just a bonus there. I absolutely love that car. I've loved it since I bought it. Landon, predictions here on the show. Let's get down to it. Let's give them up front, and then we'll talk about why we think they are. We're both picking Penn State to win. The margin of the victory is the interesting thing here. So what do you have, Penn State?
Yeah, I'll go 34-14 Penn State over Minnesota, and I think it'll be close. It'll be like a lot of other games at halftime. We could even be down by a couple, and then we come out and we play that second half of football that we really played all year. It feels a little bit 2016 like, where we are just a second half team all around. Maybe not as bad when we're off.
And not as explosive on offense. It's really the defense comes out and like force grips people into submission. There's no yards. There's no points. They just kind of blink out of existence, and it's the fourth quarter.
Exactly. And the next thing you know, the offense starts to have great field position, and the defense, like you said, has them in a chokehold. They can't go anywhere. Penn State piles on a couple touchdowns, and then you get out of there with a win. That's how I see it going, T. Frank.
I have 28-13. This is the whole thing of like, I don't need to stick to something I said on Monday, but I was around 28 points. Like, I like this defense. Here's the thing. The last couple weeks I've watched film and like, I liked watching Minnesota. I enjoyed this process of learning about them because sometimes you watch a team and you're like, I don't know what they're doing because they don't know what they're doing.
Purdue.
I don't like watching this. Yes.
Purdue.
And so like when I respect a team, I don't go, yeah, Penn State's going to score 48. But Penn State could score 48 in this game. Like, if everything goes their way, they have more talent. They can show progress and growth and get those receivers involved. I think that's entirely possible. I think it's more in the 30s than I gave 28-13 was the answer. Early in the week when I wrote something for a Minnesota website, I hadn't seen the offense at all, so I just threw out 17. And all week long, watching this offense, I was ticking points away because I'm like, that's not going to work. I can't do that against Penn State. Nope, that's not going to work. So 13, 10, somewhere in there. I think 10 is reasonable floor for what they can do. But if I had to go back, I'd probably say 31, somewhere in there. They're going to force a field goal is really what I'm trying to say. And I think that this is going to be a good game for Penn State. But like you said, might be close early because teams like Penn State and now Ohio State don't play tempo. They're not trying to run up the score early. They're trying to, with the clock that doesn't stop and the style of play to be more balanced in college football, you don't get enough possessions to go up by more than 28 at halftime.
Yeah, and I think two things to look at on both sides of the ball. Like I said, we should win today. Two things you want to see from Penn State on the defensive side. You want to see a better game from Tony Rojas. You want to see a better game from the linebackers in general. Great tackling, being in your gap. That has been a problem this year. Let's get back on track there, and that's where really those tackles for loss come. That brings me into my bold prediction, T. Frank. I'm going to go over 10 or more TFLs for Penn State's defense today against Minnesota's rushing attack.
And I think you can even fold in the screen game there, too. A lot of those tackles. Both of these teams, I feel like, do really well at pursuit laterally. So this is going to be, if you're throwing a screen, good luck to you, because I don't think you're going to have a lot of success. These corners like to hit. They play aggressively downhill on both sides of the ball. A.J. Harris is an absolute menace. Somebody asked me, I think it was you. I might have said this to a bunch of people today, this week. Like, how does can Minnesota win this game? And I said, yeah, if Zane Durant doesn't get on the bus, if Tony Rojas somehow just vanishes and they have to like put out an APB for him. I just think the defense is too good and it will give them too many opportunities. Going into the X factors, we talked about checking things off the list. I don't know whether it's Trey Wallace or if it's Liam Clifford. But to me, like we talked about, establishing a rhythm within the offense, I just need to see that. The thing I was so frustrated with after the Purdue game is, they beat up on Purdue. That was a game where you expected that. Did you see them get better at anything and work on anything? And the answer was no. So part of that was game plan and a little bit of a surprise from what Purdue came out and did schematically. But I also don't think it should matter. And this is a game where the opportunity is there against these zone coverages where you can have a day that Liam Clifford gets 4 catches for 48 yards and Trey Wallace has 7 for 90 or something like that. I think that would do well for everybody's psyche, and I would love to have that conversation on the postgame show instead of being like, okay, guys, let's find a new way to talk about the receivers not being involved. You have any other X factors? You've given a lot of great points, and I'm just coming back after the fact, but is there anything else on your mind as we get out of here?
Yeah, another small one will be Nick Singleton. Can Penn State be explosive in the run game in that, and then in turn makes their entire offense explosive and really opens up a lot for Penn State? So let's get Nick Singleton back on those explosive 50-yard runs.
It'd be nice to see any of those, right? Either run or pass. That makes you feel like, because those make you feel specifically like, yeah, my team is way better. Like, we are way better. If you can rip off a 70-yard run, that's a no doubt we have more talent than the other team. That is how it has been for generations of football. I mentioned the postgame show. Landon's going to have yours is on Sunday, right?
Yep. Sunday.
Yep. Mine is immediately after the game, so join me at the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Of course, you're going to have the one here after the game on 99.5 The Bus and 107.5 The Bus with Jason Lord. Awesome job. This is our last postgame show, or pregame show from the Field Burger and Tap here in the regular season. We will be back for one more game, Senior Day, outside the Bryce Jordan Center. We will talk to you